Hey, it looks like we're live. All right. So I've got another live stream today that's coming up in less than an hour. But because I don't have to start yet, I figured I'd come and say hey to everybody and give people a chance for a little QA. And I'm just here for probably about 40 minutes right now. So yeah, any questions that we have about anything in poker, I am pretty excited. My live stream today is going to be interviewing a dealer, and we're going to sort of get into some of the stuff that people don't always talk about. And I sort of pride myself on being able to do this, and I'll get more into this later. But I mean, look, I'm True Poker Dealer. I'm on YouTube. I am here to give real information, and that's what I intend to do. I'm not worried about painting a perfect picture for everything as a poker dealer because it's not all perfect. And I'm lucky enough to be able to interview somebody today who's willing to sort of get into some of those details. So that starts in 50 minutes from right now. Before my interview. Let's see. So yeah, so I'm just updating this right here. David says, howdy. Hey, how's it going? So yeah, this is a good opportunity. Because I've been doing some interviews, this is a good opportunity for you to get some time to ask me anything that you want. Again, at here, I should put it here, 3 p.m. I will start an interview with a poker dealer where she talks about the truth on dealing poker. Vic says, what's up, man? Do you ever host house games, home games? Let me see. Have I ever even hosted one? I've hosted some tournaments. I remember probably, man, 2004 maybe, before I ever worked in poker. I hosted a 3-table tournament that was like a $20 buy-in my garage. And that was pretty wild. When I'm looking back on it, I don't know how we dealt at all, because I certainly didn't have the skill set to be able to do it back then. But I did know how to sort of do that. And when I say I don't host them, I have been to so many home games. I have played plenty of home games. I'm very familiar with how that stuff works. However, my home games that I played in have always been with people who know how to deal. So they're probably more sophisticated than the majority of home games out there. But that being said, I do have a lot of experience with that, but I've never actually really hosted many of them, just some little tournaments, because I never really had the right place for it. But I appreciate that question. David says, I host poker games. I have monthly tournaments. Should the buybacks be the same as buy-in? I haven't been to a casino, so I don't know how it actually is. Let me see. I host poker games. I have monthly tournaments. Should the buybacks be the same as buy-in? Buybacks is not terminology that I personally am familiar with. So what do you mean by buybacks? I always enjoy finding out the little lingo that creeps into home games, because I feel like every group of home games sort of has its own lingo, period. And I often don't know what we're talking about because I know all the casino professional lingo. The second bullet. So that's a fair question. We do call those rebuys. So in a poker tournament, there's the original buy-in, which is also called the entry. Sometimes the entry fee is associated with that. And then there's 3 real options for what comes next. So the first option would be what's typically done nowadays in casinos. It took a long time to get here. They're called re-entries, where a player is treated like a brand new player to the tournament. They get a brand new random seat altogether. I sort of like that, and I personally don't see much harm in doing that in a home game, honestly, where somebody just gets a re-entry. Now, if it's a one-table home game, okay, they're going to end up getting the same seat either way. So the second thing that is done is a rebuy. So a rebuy is typically done after a player busts in a tournament. They are typically allowed to get back into the tournament. And there's a couple different types of structures. Now, typically 100% of the rebuy money goes directly toward the prize pool, unlike the original buy-in where there's usually some kind of an entry fee. And when you ask if it should be the same amount, it honestly doesn't have to be. Here's the thing. It has to be determined in advance, and whatever is determined in advance is completely reasonable. There's all these weird structures that you see in rebuy tournaments. This is a little bit older than what's done more modern, but for example, if you were to go to a rebuy tournament not too long ago, maybe like 7-8 years ago, you might have a structure where it's something like $5,000. Or I'm sorry, uh, maybe what would it be? $80 buy-ins, $40 rebuys, and you get 5,000 in chips for your first, 5,000 in chips for your second, and you're allowed to rebuy as long as you're below 5,000 in chip, or at or below 5,000 in chips. So a lot of people, what they do, I know that's a little complicated, but picture it. $80 to get in, you get your first 5,000. $40 more, you get another 5,000 for a total of 10,000 to start. And each time after that, it's only $40 to get in. I'm totally making that amount up. But that is something that could potentially have happened, and I've definitely ran and played in tournaments like that. It can also be something like $60 for your first buy-in and $40 for each rebuy, and you get the same amount for each one. My personal favorite way to do it is literally just when someone gets busted, just treat them just like a new player and go with re-entry. That's what I like to do. I think it's the simplest overall, and it allows people to get an entire new starting stack anytime they bust. And it's what casinos do because it sort of creates the least amount of friction. Just brand new player to the table, no problem. It's just what's done nowadays. The other piece that can be done, so I mentioned re-entry and I mentioned rebuy. You can also have what's called an add-on, which in an add-on, it's sort of like, let's see, at a certain period in the tournament, you're allowed to get, like when the buy-in is over, you're allowed to one time, everything stops and you're allowed to add on for a certain amount of money. So it might be $20 gets you 2,000 in chips. Sometimes there's an add-on that's possible to get before you play your first hand. That one's always sort of a booby trap because the players don't know about it or don't think to ask for it, end up missing out. Yeah, and that one's sort of a bummer. But yeah, David, you said perfect, thanks. So I don't know what your buy-in is. Like maybe it's $20, maybe it's 100, whatever it is. It's always so simple just to say, we're allowing the same player to enter the tournament twice. And nowadays, if it's a home game, take a rake on it twice. Like if you're taking a rake legally, do it twice. Why not? You know, it's $100 for the first time, $100 for the second time. You get a brand new stack. I don't see what the problem is. It's what's done in casinos. So great questions to start. And I just looked over to the left. I've got a tea. I'm uncaffeinated so far today, and I've got my tea over there, and I haven't even touched it yet. I forgot all about it. Oh well. I do. Yep. So yeah, this is cool. Look, this is my table behind me, and this is at my friend Jerry's house. I did an interview with him not too long ago, and I gotta say, I have always dreamed about having people come and play on this table in a home game. The only reason I haven't done it was because it's not my house, and I try to respect that. And you know, we sort of made a joke that when COVID's over, that'll be the time that we go and do this because, well, that'll be the time that we want to just say, lots of people, let's play poker, you know. But I don't know. Running a home game is, I once got recruited because I'm on YouTube as Truepokerdealer. I got recruited by somebody in Dubai they split time between Pakistan and Dubai, and they wanted me to like set up their home game and all this stuff. And I almost did it before I sort of chickened out. This was years ago. Vic says, do you live in Nevada? I do not. I have been to Vegas, I want to say 8 times now. I have played in one bracelet event. I've never worked the WSOP. Maybe I'll do that one day for fun. But I live in South Florida. I have worked in casinos in Washington State, so I've been on the West Coast. And I've also worked a lot of casinos in South Florida. And I've been here through a lot of the growth of what's happened in Florida. And I'm also very familiar with casinos in other parts of this country. I'm somewhat familiar with casinos in Europe and some other places in the world, not as much as the US, although I did once take a trip in 2005. I took a trip all through Eastern Europe, and I stopped at a whole bunch of Was it Eastern? No, it was Western Europe. I can't even remember. It's been so long. But I stopped at a whole bunch of casinos. I stopped in casinos in Italy, France, Ireland, I want to say, and Spain. And all of that was really fascinating. That was before I ever worked in casinos, too. Just by a little bit, just before. But yeah, so I'm here right now because I just want to make sure that I give people some time where they can ask questions, they can sort of pop in and, get whatever you want answered and then get out. And I am going to be doing an interview today in 40 minutes, and it is with a poker dealer, somebody who doesn't have only positive things to say about being a poker dealer. And I'm sort of excited to do that. When I asked her sort of casually, like, hey, would you be willing to do an interview? I was relatively shocked she said yes, and I'm very excited for this. She's also a YouTuber, an up and coming YouTuber, and it's going to be interesting having this little conversation with her about all this stuff. David says, I turned 19 and the casino literally shut down that day for COVID. Have you worked at Hard Rock? Is it a good place to work? I have worked at Hard Rock. I worked there as a dealer for just under 4 months, and then I went off to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I had a great experience as a dealer there. My reason for leaving was literally just because I was going off to work on stuff like this. I ended up raising a whole bunch of money for a different business, and it's still sitting there, and I'll get back to it. But I really liked working at the Hard Rock. I also worked at their sister property, Coconut Creek. I was a poker dealer at the Hard Rock. It was my first time dealing in 7 years when I went back there, because I started my career as a dealer back in 2007. I was a dealer slash supervisor, so I was a dual rate for about 3 years. Then I went on to be a full-time floor and shift manager after that. And I went back to deal at the Hard Rock in Hollywood. And here's the thing about the Hard Rock in Hollywood. The money is amazing. The poker players are always showing up there. It's always really nice equipment, really nice facilities. It's sort of like you just get in. It's one of the least social poker rooms for dealers that I've ever been in. Like, the dynamic there was, you're just there to do your job, you're working, and then you take off. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's sort of peaceful, honestly. The other places I've worked, every single casino I've ever worked at other than this one was very like, people were getting together after work and all this stuff. The Hard Rock was the least of that I'd ever seen. And I don't think it was just me. Let's see. How do you split tips at Hard Rock? The poker dealers just keep their own. So whatever you get, you keep. You put it in your tip box. You cash out at the end of your shift, and that goes on your check. And it's pretty good. Like I said, when I was there, my tip rate was always over 25 an hour, and my base pay combined, I was making considerably better than that. I think I had probably, I want to say 6 days in 3.5 months that were in the 400 and 500s, a bunch of $300 days, a bunch of $200 days, and almost nothing below that. I can remember maybe like 3 or 4 days where I ever was under 200, and it was pretty close. Let's see. Peter, which games do they have in Europe, Asia that are not as common in the US? That's interesting. So I did just say that I have some experience out there, not a ton. When I went to Europe, it was about 15, 16 years ago. So, and I've also been to Malta probably about 7, 8, 9 years ago, and I played poker there. I mean, I know from my personal experience 15 years ago, I'm going to say it's probably evolved since then, and I don't know for sure what these answers are. But they seemed to play more Omaha out there than we're used to seeing. Specifically, higher stakes limit Omaha. That's what I remember. And oh, you said, how does cashing out work as a dealer? I'll answer that in a second. And let's see. The table games felt similar. I mean, if you're talking about table games and stuff, roulette's slightly different. What was it? I don't think there's a double zero. I think there's just single zero in roulette, which does actually make the odds slightly better for the player. What else is there? Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I'm not going to pretend like I know the answers to all the stuff that's going on in Europe compared to out here. I have had conversations with people in the True Poker Dealer channel where they sort of tell me some of the games that are being played out there. There's some 5 card variants of Omaha that are played out in different places in Europe, but it all seems very regional based and not necessarily widespread across the places out there. I know that the online poker scene is a bit different. You know, there's a lot more options for online poker, but they've also been regulating that a bit as well, where now places like Italy, you can only play within your specific country. That happened probably like 3-4 years ago. But yeah, I'm gonna be honest here, and I'm gonna say I'm really not an expert when it comes to Europe and Asia. So David says, how does cashing out work as a dealer compared to a player? When you are done with your shift, you've got your tip box, and it's hopefully going to be full of poker chips that were given to you as tips throughout your shift. This is the thing, you bring this to every single table that you go to, and at the end of your shift, you take that tip box, you bring it to. There's a few different ways that they do it, but at the end of the day, it's almost always you go to a cashier, whether it's in the front of the house or in the back of the house in private. I like it when it's private, but not every poker room's big enough for that. You take it to the cashier, they give you a key, you unlock it for the first time for the day. It's supposed to be locked. You're not supposed to be able to reach in there at all. That's a safety precaution to make sure that you're not stealing or misrepresenting your tips or anything like that. Under very clear surveillance coverage, you dump your tip box out. All the chips are there, and you got to stack them up under surveillance and put them in racks. Then you bring them over to the cashier. The cashier counts them down, and then depending on how it works at the particular property you're in, if you work somewhere where it goes on your check, then the cashier is going to count it with you. You both verify that it's the correct amount. You can choose before you do that to put a little bit in the tip box for them. Sometimes they have a tip box there. It's usually nice to give $1, $2, $3, something like that. And then that amount you sign off, and then you get your tip slip, and that's how you know how much is going to go in your check. Another possibility, which I've never dealt with, but I'm very aware that it's done in some states. This depends on the regulations. Sometimes they let you take it back in cash. So in those cases, you do the same thing, you count it all, and then they give you the cash, and then you just sort of walk with the cash in your pocket. And there's pros and cons to that. If you work in a state where it ends up just being cash in your pocket, it's great because you don't have to worry about reporting it or anything like that. Because a lot of the time they'll do something like report on your check for your taxes that you made some amount per hour that's reasonable, like $11 an hour, and there's a negotiation with the state that leads to that. I know Maryland is like this. I think Vegas has some stuff like this too. And you know, the positive side of that is you can save a lot of money on taxes. The negative side is if you're trying to buy a house or something like that, you don't have reportable income that's very high, so it makes it a little bit harder to get approved for things. But you know, like I said, there's pros and cons to stuff like this. David said, isn't there more short deck played in other continents? That's possible. I know that there was a phase where there was a decent amount of short deck played in the U.S. It seems to have sort of died off a bit from what I've seen. I mean, we always used to joke, myself when I was a shift manager and a supervisor, myself and the other shifts and supervisors and the director and all the people that worked in the casino that were in the management side, we would always joke when we were thinking about what we wanted to do in the room. And we would say, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's clean, people are going to want to gamble on it, whatever the game is. And it just always seems to be true. You give people something to gamble on, they're going to gamble on it. As long as it doesn't feel awful. If it feels fun and exciting, then they're going to do it. So short deck is an example of that. It's a variation that I can't speak to that, though. If anybody's in the chat, by the way, and wants to answer this question about what games they have in Europe and Asia that are not as common in the U.S., I'd love to hear the answers to that. It's one of the ways that I learn as well. I do have people that I know that are out there. I don't have access to them in the middle of this live stream. David says, what's your favorite and least favorite style of poker to deal and play? I appreciate that. So I'm going to say this. I absolutely love playing No Limit Texas Hold'em. I love 2-5 No Limit as a cash game. Why? Because I feel like I can afford it and it doesn't kill me most of the time. and I love playing tournaments. I just like many poker players. I'm true poker dealer, but that doesn't mean I don't dream about winning a WSOP main event bracelet. Like that's still on my mind. I would love to do that. You know, it's sad that the series isn't here. I've literally only taken one shot at any WSOP event, and it was $1,000 buy-in, and I bubbled. You know, within like 15 players out of a $2,100 player pool. Um, but I honestly still had fun doing it. But yeah, look, I'm not great at Pot Limit Omaha. I'm not great at these other games. I feel like I can hold my own in Texas Hold'em, and therefore it's still my favorite game to play. But also, working in the industry, I've played less than people who have maybe played their whole lives, right? Because I've worked in it. And I will say this, while working in it, anytime I was working 40-hour weeks, whether I was dealing, well, actually, especially when I was dealing, but whether I was dealing or playing, I was a lot less interested in going to play poker. There's a few reasons for that, and this is actually good for anyone to know. If you're a poker player who's an avid poker player, it's probably going to happen to you where if you end up working in a poker room, it's going to be tough to enjoy playing quite as much during that stretch. If you stop working in it, you probably get it back like I did. But, you know, when you're around it all the time, you want to change the scenery. You don't want to just be there all the time. And then also, when you work in the industry, you end up having to keep this little bit of a casino persona, especially me as a supervisor. I don't want to upset anybody that sees me outside of the casino that I work in. So if I go to another poker room in the area, you're going to run into people that you know that are guests that play poker in the room that you work in. And you sort of have to turn it on a little bit, and it does feel a little bit tiring. So I definitely played less poker because of that. I tended to play a little bit later at night when maybe it didn't matter as much. Um, but in terms of dealing, I've always enjoyed dealing Pot Limit Omaha because honestly, the game's a little bit slower in terms of the work that I have to do. I'm not making changes much. It's usually a time rake, and it's a little bit more interesting. And once you sort of memorize a lot of the stuff that you have to do and how it works and all that, it's still pretty relaxing. I find that dealing Texas Hold'em is a lot of making change, which is great, but Pot Limit Omaha has always been a nice break for me, and it's similar enough to Hold'em where I don't have to completely change modes in my mind. It's just a little bit of math. I always found when dealing some of these other high stakes games, there was a bit more pressure there. It was a bit more like I was doing stuff that I was less trained in because when you do hours and hours and hours and hours dealing Texas Hold'em, and Omaha is incredibly similar to it, and then you switch to a mixed game of some sort. For me, I always felt like I had to sort of get into that, and I never really enjoyed that. It took more concentration. So PLO was always a thing that I actually found to be the most relaxing. Um, Vic says, "What's your age?" I am currently 39. I will be 40 later this year in November. Um, let's see. And Gyro says, "What's the most you've ever seen someone win?" I mean, gosh, I've dealt games where in 30 minutes I've seen $50,000 swings. I've seen pots that are well over 100,000 plenty of times. I've dealt them as a supervisor too. Like you see everything, right? Because if you're dealing, you're only seeing literally what's in that one table in front of you. But if you're supervising, anything significant that happens, you're gaining in the experience of because you're going to hear about it or potentially have to go monitor it because you do have to do a lot of monitoring as a supervisor. Um, I think the most I've personally seen anyone win in one session was probably around, I want to say 400K, but I could be way off in that. Like it could be more. Here's the thing: after you're around it and you see these big games a lot, you just get used to it. For me, I always ended up getting this role of facilitating the game and making it so that it worked the way that the players would expect it to work. And you know, I always wanted it not to be a big deal. And as a result of that, the like you know you just sort of create the habit of not closely monitoring absolutely every single thing that's happening. That being said, when someone's cashing out large amounts like that, they do need people to monitor it, supervisors, etc. Have you ever dealt to any big name player? I have dealt to a handful of big name players. I was just sort of referencing. I dealt to Jason Mercier, and uh, he was playing Chinese poker first, and he absolutely cleaned somebody out, and he did it in a way that was really sophisticated, where um, the player that he was up against was just what's the way I want to say it? They did not realize that it wasn't just luck is the real thing that I'll say. And there's an art to getting people to feel excited to continue to lose their money against you is all I can tell you. Um, who else have I dealt to that's been big name? I mean, Brian Hastings and uh, well, let me see. And I've been around and sort of close to, like, Negreanu and Helmuth and all that stuff, but I've never specifically dealt to them. Most of my experience has been as a floor, and obviously as a player as well. I've seen some of these guys too. Let's see, I've been around, like, it's probably got to the point where I don't know all the people that I've been around either, because I mean, for me, by the way, there's a lot of different ways to be as an employee in casinos and as a supervisor. The way that I was very casino employee focused. I was much more focused on making sure that the people that worked in the room had a great experience than worrying about the players. There were a lot of other people I allowed to take care of the players having a good experience. And, I was never like giving them a hard time or making it a bad experience for them, but I was always very focused on fixing the problems and creating improvements for the people that worked there. All this other stuff sort of didn't phase me as much when these players were coming in that were famous and all that. That's just sort of me. Peter says Chinese poker is an interesting game. Yes. One of my past live streams, I sort of showed how to do it. They would play open face Chinese for money. It's actually what it was. It was open face. And that's a fascinating game as well, because everyone can see what you have and your decisions are coming, seeing what they have as well, and the dealer button matters in open face. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. Do you have any strategy regarding learning and applying for calculating the bets in pot limit Omaha 3 times the previous bet plus chips on the table? I do. I actually teach on my channel. If you join my channel under the bonus mix games section, I have an entire breakdown for how to deal Omaha beginning to end. I also teach 7-card stud and all that stuff. The simplest strategy, like you said, is 3 times the previous bet. We call it plus the trail, and plus the pot would be after that. So, and then there's other stuff too. But I think I broke. Well, let me look and see. I want to see how many videos I actually put in here, because it's quite a lot of stuff, honestly. The video that you're asking about, pot limit Omaha, it's a 2.5 hour video, and it covers just about everything that you would need in order to be able to get that figured out for yourself. I mean, here's the thing. It takes a lot of demonstration in order to be able to see these differences. Like, the trail doesn't count for the player who's in action, for example, and that can be really confusing. Almost every single dealer that I see learning to deal pot limit Omaha messes that up, where they do count the trail in front of the player. And what I do in that video is I literally break down where the math comes from so that you get a clear understanding of what it really is. And then I go into the formula and how to use it with the understanding of what's going on. It's one of those things too that the more that you do it, the more practiced you get at it, the better that you end up being. But this video is pretty powerful, and I'm actually in the process for all of my courses online. I'm in the process of going back and editing the original video where I teach the lesson to make it even cleaner. And I've done that for, I want to say, about 11 lessons so far. And it's been pretty powerful. Yeah, 2.5 hours. I appreciate that you say you'll watch it. I do want to warn you. You do have to join the channel, and I do charge for it in order to get these lessons. Ooh, excuse me, 1 second. There's a guest at the door, and I have to let them in. So I do charge for this. I've sort of been debating how I want to approach all this stuff moving forward, and it does. I mean, look, it took me a very long time to learn all this info and to be able to share it with you guys, and people have really enjoyed these courses. So uh, I feel great about what's out there, and there are a lot of dealers now that have benefited. This course that I'm referring to, by the way, the bonus mix game one, it's literally made so that somebody can pass a WSOP audition, which is a very challenging audition. So, um, yeah, thank you for that question too. Let's see, and at some point, probably by this summer or so, I do intend on cutting up little segments of these videos and allowing people to see them on YouTube. Um, I just have to see sort of how that goes. Ooh, I gotta stop that. If I start shuffling chips on this, you guys will go crazy. I'm gonna say I've got about 5 more minutes right now because I do have to do a quick little prep for the interview I'm about to do with a poker dealer. So yeah, I'm gonna be coming back in 20 minutes, and I'll be interviewing a poker dealer, and I'm so happy that she's coming on. She's going to be telling the truth about what it's like to be a poker dealer, something that you don't get to hear all the time. People generally say everything is amazing when you're making, $25 to $40 an hour, which is how much you make, and we'll ask her how much she makes, and she said she'd tell us, so I'm fine with that. And it's not all perfect as a poker dealer, and I think that's some of what she's most interested in sharing. So this is going to be good. And I will take any last questions right now for anybody that has them. And then I'll say goodbye for a little bit, and I will be joined shortly by my guest. So if anybody has any questions right now that they just want to wrap up with, now's the time to get it in. I'm sort of winding this down a little bit before I have to start because I want that few minutes to be able to get the camera set up and all that stuff for 2 people instead of 1, because she has now arrived. The pig is in the poke, as they say on The Simpsons. And no one says that. I'm hearing that whispering through my green screen, but I do think that it's said sometimes. So, all right, I'm going to take off since I didn't see any more questions. I say thank you, everybody, for coming and jumping in and asking these questions here. And I'll see you guys at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be right back.